This is our third Zoomed celebration of Waitangi Day. It's amazing that a young man in 1792, born in Waterford, should have such a significance today. His name will be familiar in a moment or two. Was the son of a barrister, Anglo-Irish family. The father was a barrister, and at the age of 11 years joined the Royal Navy as a second-class volunteer, and immediately went to be involved in the Napoleonic Wars, which lasted, maybe some of you will know, from 1803 to about 1815, and rose up through the ranks, was involved in anti-piracy in the Caribbean for many years. At the age of 20, he was made a first lieutenant. And then he was the first Lord of the Admiralty, who was amazingly also entitled the Earl of Auckland. And I'm not sure whether it was Auckland in England or Auckland in New Zealand. I suspect it might have been the English Auckland, but anyway, he sent him to go to do work with his crew in Australia, and he surveyed South Victoria, Southern Victoria, and Port Phillip, which was eventually renamed after him, as well as the city of Hobson's Bay, part of the suburbs of Melbourne in Australia. William Hobson, in May 1837, was sent to do some work with the British resident in New Zealand, a man by the name of James Busby, who had penned with some others, but was the main force behind penning the Declaration of Independence earlier. And then in 1838, Hobson, as a result of his work, which was involving some, Busby was under some pressure from tribal infighting amongst the Maoris, and he submitted a report in New Zealand to Westminster proposing sovereignty over the islands of New Zealand, and after negotiating or trying to negotiate land appropriation with the Maori leaders, it eventually led to him starting to draft with Busby the Treaty of Waitangi. Waitangi, if I'm correct in my research, Waitangi means weeping waters. I'm not sure about the significance of that, but that's what it means. And in February 1840, he got the tribes, chieftains, and also, interestingly, many women leaders to sign also. They were involved in that at a time when women leaders were, maybe most parts of the world, were not very common. One of the British colonels there involved in running affairs wanted to make Wellington the capital, but it was William Hobson's proposal that Auckland should become a city, be developed as a city, a major port, and should be the capital. And just after the signing of the treaty, he had his first stroke. William Hobson was at 48 years of old, had a cerebral hemorrhage of sorts, and eventually the signing of the Royal Charter for New Zealand to become a Crown colony separate from New South Wales took place. In May, a year later, he was made Chief Justice and the first Governor of New Zealand, and of the Chairman of the General Legislative Council, with Hobson being in charge of setting up the membership. He was a bit colourful. He closed two newspapers who opposed his views, one of them being the Auckland Gazette, and the New Zealand Herald, who ridiculed some of his plans. He was forced to write too many cheques off the British Exchequer, was eventually recalled to London. Before he got back, had his second stroke at the age of 50. His last act was to declare an Auckland Anniversary Day. He is buried in the Waitangi suburb of Hobsonville, which is named after him, of course. He's buried in Symonds Street Cemetery today. But there was a young man leaving to join at the age of 11 and to become such a substantial person involved in what we're celebrating today, the Treaty of Waitangi. With that little bit of background, I think everybody's probably been admitted to the meeting now on Zoom. I hope you can all hear well. And to remind all of you who've joined us that you are probably all muted unless and until you wish to make a contribution, in which case you can unmute yourselves. Could I welcome first the Right Worshipful, the Mayor of Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council, Stephen Martin. Stephen has been with us on several occasions before, as many of you were last at the September reopening of the new exhibition at the House. I would like to secondly welcome the Deputy High Commissioner from London, Shannon Austin. Shannon's been with us before as a good friend and knows us well and has supported us very kindly, and we are very appreciative of her support and the things we've been trying to achieve. With the Mayor of London, of Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council, we have the Chief Executive, David Burns, who's also been very supportive and runs through the various mayors as they fulfill their yearly terms of office. Particularly welcome. I'd also like to welcome the Honourable Clarence Tan, who's president of a New Zealand Society, which covers the English links between New Zealand and this part of the world. It's his first visit to us, and he's very welcome. If I can't see everybody on screen, I hope he's there. And then Jonathan Saint, who's the person responsible, the president of the Irish New Zealand Society in Dublin. We have also with us today a number of our partners in the sponsorship of various things that we tried to do. They're too numerous to welcome, and some of them will get the recording of this hopefully in the next week or so when they can do this, and it's obviously very in the early hours of the evening, the night in New Zealand. Also want to welcome the Honorary Consul, who is Professor Sinclair Stockman, who's also one of our directors. And finally, in this selection, Brian McKnight, our patron, who is joining us today too. You're all very welcome, as are all our members, our visitors, our special guests, and our friends from around the country. Today, we also will be welcoming Dr. William Crawley. You'll hear more about him later in the programme. But I would like to start with the New Zealand National Anthem. The first verse will be sung in Maori, and I hope that the English and the Maori words will be on the screen. And so you will see that it's been recorded, and you can sing unmuted or muted as you like, and join in anyway. It's a wonderful anthem. I've read Thomas Bracken, unlike Hobson, Thomas Bracken is an Ulsterman from Monaghan, and Thomas Bracken wrote his wonderful anthem. It was unveiled in 1876, and then was first sung publicly, as far as I know, at the Empire Games in 1960, and at the Olympics in 1972. With permission from the Crown in 1976, it became the country's second national anthem, and it's still one of the great national anthems. But I would urge you to look up Thomas Bracken's full version, because the words are really very inspiring and far better than many lyrics of various national anthems around the world. This is a particularly good one, and we're now going to ask Rory to play, and we'll join in the New Zealand national anthem. And I'm sure that's warmed the cockles of her heart, and those of you who are Kiwis, we've enjoyed singing it too. I'd now like to welcome formally the Deputy High Commissioner in London, Shannon Austin.
O tēnā koutou katoa, ina rau rangatira mā, ina mana, ina reo, ke kome te maanga o Aotearoa, e mihi ana, kia koutou katoa, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all, and to the many esteemed guests and leaders. I'm here as a spokesperson of Aotearoa New Zealand to greet and acknowledge you all. So once again, greetings, greetings, greetings to you all. It is my great pleasure and privilege to join you here today and to mark Waitangi Day with you. Thank you, Paul, for that excellent potted history of William Hobson and also of the national anthem. It's a great way to start. At the outset, I also wanted to acknowledge all those people on the screen that Paul acknowledged in his introduction, including, of course, Paul Hewitt himself, the chairman of the Ulster New Zealand Trust. It really was a pleasure to meet many of you in person at the Ballance House last year to celebrate the 30th anniversary and to open the wonderful new exhibition there. While it is unfortunate that COVID requires us to once again mark this day virtually, I'm certain that we'll all get to meet in person again soon. And I know that High Commissioner Bede Curry is looking forward to making his first official visit to Northern Ireland in the coming months. And meeting on screen is a solemn reminder that due to COVID having inevitably now reached Aotearoa New Zealand shores, there will this year be no in-person gathering at the treaty grounds in Waitangi, where Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, was signed 182 years ago. During my Ballance House visit, I recited my favourite whakatauki, or saying in Te Reo Māori. He aha te mea nui o tēnei ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in this world? It is people, it is people, it is people. And I spoke about how people are at the start and the heart of the links between Northern Ireland and Aotearoa New Zealand. And people, he tangata, are of course at the heart of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi. As you all know, thanks to Paul's excellent history, Waitangi Day marks the signing of Te Tiriti, Aotearoa New Zealand's founding document, on the 6th of February. And that's when it was signed by representatives of the British Crown and over 500 Māori chiefs or rangatira. A national holiday marking Waitangi Day was declared in 1974, and it has grown in significance for all New Zealanders through the mahi or work of Māori, which has fostered a better understanding of the treaty's meaning. Te Tiriti has often been hotly debated, and our understanding of it has evolved over its 182 years. But for many New Zealanders, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, remains a source of hope and optimism for our future. Waitangi Day also connects us in a unique way to the United Kingdom, as Paul has again outlined. We are now a proudly independent nation, but one with enduring ties of family and friendship with the United Kingdom, and as you all well know, with Northern Ireland in particular. These ties are dynamic and they are evolving. The fact that this year we will sign a world-leading free trade agreement with the UK is but the latest evidence of that. The New Zealand-UK Free Trade Agreement will be the first to incorporate a dedicated chapter focused on Māori trade and economic cooperation. It recognises the unique context of Māori and the British Crown being original signatories to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, and the special and unique relationship between the UK and Māori arising from this. The primary purpose of the chapter is to promote the pursuit of cooperation between us in order to contribute to enabling and advancing Māori economic aspirations and well-being. In other good news, I'm sure many of you will have seen the announcement earlier this week regarding the plan for reopening New Zealand's border in a careful and cautious way. This means that, COVID willing, our border will reopen to fully vaccinated New Zealanders and other eligible travellers from the rest of the world starting from the 13th of March. This will allow us to make and remake those connections between the people of Northern Ireland and Aotearoa New Zealand, he tangata, that are at the start and the heart of our relationship. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for everything that you have done to keep those connections alive during what have been the most difficult of times. We very much look forward to marking Waitangi Day 2023 in person. Kia ora.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for that. It's lovely to have you with us and to feel that those of us who live in this sort of slightly offshore area, as the Kiwis know, being offshore to another big nation, it's great that we keep these ties as close as they are. And your contribution is always appreciated, as those who've been before you and hopefully after you too. It's my pleasure now to welcome and ask to speak briefly to us the Right Worshipful Alderman Stephen Martin, who, as I said earlier to those of you who were on with us, has been a friend to us, as many of his colleagues on Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council. Alderman, Mayor, Stephen, would you now like to speak to us if you can unmute?
Thank you, Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real pleasure to join you here today to celebrate Waitangi Day, albeit virtually, but I think given the participants today, I think we can say within the Ballance House family. Today is a marker, as it were, of those connections and building on what has been a tradition within our council area of ensuring that those links and those relationships remain true and current. As Mayor, I am delighted that the Ulster New Zealand Trust is hosted, based and takes forward its work in our council area, and for offering us the opportunity today to mark this moment in history where our cultures plan a way forward together. I would give special mention to the technical assistance offered up today, Mr. Chairman. The online space has its benefits, but it also has its challenges. And I'm pleased that so many people have ventured into the realms of Zoom to be part of today's proceedings. And I'm also pleased to hear that the footage of today's event will be shared with friends in New Zealand, which I think shows how those connections as we move forward will continue to prosper. People from Northern Ireland have shaped New Zealand over many years, and our strong links, I hope, will remain for the decades ahead. The connection between our council and Ballance House also extends to the foundation of our Declaration of Friendship between Lisburn and Waitangi, which was re-signed by my predecessor as mayor, the late Councillor Margaret Tullerton, in 2014. It's important, I think, that those links remain and are worked on to ensure that they continue into the future. And I congratulate everyone at the Ulster New Zealand Trust for all that they do to ensure that your approach to education, heritage, and culture continues. And I think that's one reason, part of the reason why your community work has been rightly recognised through the award of the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service. I think what you do is unique, and Ballance House itself is a special attraction, a special base within our council area, given what it does in terms of our shared heritage. You mentioned earlier, and I recall with great fondness spending time and getting to know Shannon, our Deputy High Commissioner, and I'm delighted that Shannon is on the call today. And at that time, I think time was pressing given the ongoing trade negotiations at that stage. So it's good as time has moved on that they also have reached the conclusion. And I will forever recall the engagement to mark the 30th anniversary of Ballance House in September and the opening of the impressive the Ulster New Zealand Story exhibition, which created by one of our former colleagues, Mr. Brian Mackey. A wealth of experience and knowledge, which I am sure you will agree adds infinitely to any project. There is plenty of knowledge to be gained at Ballance House, and I think it's really important that people such as myself, when we were youngsters, are able to access that, and hopefully as things move on through into the next stage of what the pandemic has brought us, that we will again see school children using the resource that is Ballance House. In preparation for today, I reconnected with our Mayor Hamish of Waitangi to wish him and his colleagues on the District Council and the people that they serve a happy Waitangi Day. The modern technology that is Zoom and email allows that to happen more easily, and I have offered to him on the basis of those historic connections that we take an opportunity over the next couple of months to renew that friendship. In particular, I note that Waitangi Day falls on Sunday the 6th of February, which is also the date of the Queen's Accession Day. And I think it's important as members of the Commonwealth of Nations and in the Queen's Platinum Jubilee that there perhaps a scope for recognition of that in the months ahead. I'd like to wish everyone on the call today a good Waitangi Day, and to ask that we remember the work of those who are no longer with us, who sustained the Ulster New Zealand Trust for many years, so that we can all benefit from their work today. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for those very appropriate and thoughtful words. We appreciate your time and your input very much indeed, and your presence is particularly valuable to us. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker. Every year we have somebody from different walks of life. Dr. William Crawley probably more than most of our speakers over many years, knows more or as much about our setting and New Zealand as any of you, because as a well-known journalist and broadcaster, for many of us living in Northern Ireland, hearing his voice and his input to Sunday Sequence and to his weekday show at lunchtime, dealing with politics, but he's been involved in so much more than that as writer and producer of radio and television programs and documentaries. He presented one of the landmark natural history series, and also explored the scientific genius of one of the best known Ulstermen, Lord Kelvin, and also has traced the history of Presbyterians in a remarkable program too. He did a 16-part multi-series TV history of migration from Northern Ireland, from the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And we particularly remember the 3-part program he did on New Zealand when he traveled there some years back, which is a wonderful program. In 2012, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from Queen's. And in 2019, he was elected a member of the Royal Irish Academy. William Crawley is the sort of person that we need to hear more of. I think most of us appreciate the untypical friendliness and decency of the encounters that he has with people who sometimes don't want just to be in that particular tone or vein of discussion. And I know that those of us who listen to him regularly appreciate and value him for that humanity that he brings to much of what is often very inhumane and unreasonable discourse on the airwaves. And particularly this week, we couldn't have foreseen this months ago when we first started talking about our guest speaker coming to us. We couldn't have foreseen the pressure on him as it would be through these 5 lunchtimes coming to today and following on from his own program. So Dr. Crawley, you are extremely welcome. We appreciate your being able to come to us today. And we've given you a wide brief to talk about many things. So whether you're talking about things that are close to your heart or further afield, we'd ask you now to speak to those who are assembled and those who will hear this in different parts of the world in the days to come. Dr. William Crawley.
Paul, thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Let me just check. Nod, yes. The benefit of this Zoom is I can flick with my fingers across the screen and check out all your living rooms and kitchens. Is there any bedrooms in there as well? This is one of the great things about broadcasting and TV these days, isn't it? When you're watching people, they don't join you always from the studio. They can sometimes join you from their home often. I think people are more interested in looking what's behind people half the time. Can you imagine what it would have been like in the 19th century when some of our forebears made a 3-month journey on a ship to the Bay of Plenty, say, in New Zealand, to begin a new life? If they had this kind of technology, just to kind of connect with the family they left behind. Instead, they might send a letter, which would take weeks, maybe get a reply that would take weeks. You were really cut off. And I just feel like all this technology is fabulous, isn't it, for making the world feel smaller and making us all feel more like a family. I already feel like I know so many of you just from what you've already been talking about. And thank you so much, Paul, for that lovely introduction. You're much too kind. Thank you to the Mayor, to Stephen, and to the Deputy High Commissioner, Shannon, for your very helpful words framing today around this very special day, Waitangi Day, but also enabling me to have a chat with you, and I hope we'll get some questions as well.
My visit to New Zealand wasn't just about tourism, though I did a bit of tourism at the end of it. I do recommend, incidentally, if you ever get a chance to visit New Zealand, doing what we did, because we just rented a car and for a bit of holiday at the end of this work, and used one of these sort of e-booker type apps and just like hit the road. for 10 days, just traveling and discovering as we went, and just staying wherever we felt like, happening across places, which was just lovely. But my actual journalistic journey to New Zealand was to try to make sense of the connection between New Zealand and this place, Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, Ulster, however you wish to talk about it, and indeed the wider Irish story, because it's an enormous connection. Even to this day, 1 in 10 New Zealanders claims an Irish ancestry. And if you dig into that 1 in 10, you'll find that nearly half of them claim an Ulster Irish ancestry. And if you dig further into that, you will find that the counties of Antrim and Down are represented there more than any other counties. So this is in many ways a north of Ireland story for us. I remember visiting in Wellington, the National Library and the Parliament, and being able to hold in my hands in this film that we made the seal of the province of New Ulster in the colony of New Zealand. The colony of New Zealand was begun just after this period you've been talking about in Waitangi Day. It's 1840, so from 1841 you have the colony of New Zealand, and the province of New Ulster, which took up, you know, it took up the North Island, and there was New Munster, the Southern Island. That tells you something for a period of 12 years or thereabouts. The term New Ulster is used of God's own country, of this remarkable place. When you play the national anthem, Thomas Bracken's words, I remember standing with people from contemporary Northern Ireland who had gone to begin a new life in New Zealand, and I stood with them at a naturalization ceremony, and we all sang the New Zealand national anthem as part of that ceremony. And there they were, continuing this remarkable story that in many ways begins in the 19th century. Who knows when it ended? I remember going to Christchurch after the earthquake with the Northern Irish family who had relocated there, construction of Christchurch, and just a close. And it's a story that has personal contacts for me too. I also, when I was in Hamilton in the North Island, visited and stayed with a good friend of mine, Helen Ann, and she at that point was the Bishop of Waikato, the Anglican Bishop of Waikato. She's now the Bishop of Ripon. I visited a couple of friends also in Hamilton who have become very significant in the kind of media creative world in New Zealand. Mike Riddell, who's a writer and filmmaker, who The Insatiable Moon, which is set in Ponsonby in Auckland, where I stayed for a while on this journey. And it's directed by Mike's wife, Rosemary Riddell, who's a wonderful writer herself, a director, a former actor, and more recently, a lawyer and a judge. What a life to pack into one story in Rosemary's story. And it was just lovely to find the personal connections and the historic connections and the cultural connections between this place, Northern Ireland, what we now call Northern Ireland, and New Zealand. And thank you, by the way, Paul and Sally and everyone, for this lovely book, which has arrived from you as a gift. The Rainmaker, which is the biography of John Ballance, and Tim McIver, who wrote that book, was actually an advisor to my film series in New Zealand, and Tim took me on film. We recorded this. It's in the first episode of our Brave New World series. We visited the Prime Minister's residence in Wellington, Premier House, where John Ballance died at the very young age of 54, died in office. And Ballance is such a very impressive figure. Like myself, a journalist, in his case, a journalist who traveled to New Zealand in 1866, emigrated there, settled in Wanganui, established, I think he wanted to work with his hands originally, but he ended up becoming a journalist and established an evening newspaper, the Herald, there in Wanganui. And as a consequence of kind of profile he gained in journalism, he moved into politics, and eventually, as we all know, he became the founder of the Liberal Party, what was then the Liberal Party, and became Prime Minister of New Zealand. His mother was a Quaker, and perhaps that Quaker influence is seen in the kind of sort of 19th century liberalism that you see in John Ballance's contribution to politics, a very, very significant contribution to politics. I find him a very impressive man. I find his story really quite inspiring in so many ways. And then there was also William Massey, who's also very well known here. Massey Avenue leads up to Stormont. Farmer Bill, as he was called back in the day. They all had nicknames, didn't they? The Rainmaker is the nickname given to John Ballance because during his time as Premier, there was a kind of period of prosperity, and they called him the Rainmaker. And in the case of William Massey, Farmer Bill, a big focus on agriculture and the farming communities, and he's the founding leader of the Reform Party. And those two parties don't exist anymore, but they evolved towards each other through the United Party, and you've got the National Party today in New Zealand, which is the continuity story. These two very different people, William Massey on the right of politics, you might say, and John Ballance on the center, in the center of politics, I would say perhaps center right, and then you bring them together in their story in New Zealand, and you've got a contribution that links you right through to today's politics in New Zealand. I know you guys have talked a great deal over the years about James Dilworth, and I trace his story as well in my series. An Auckland settler who went to the Royal School Dungannon and eventually made his fortune in land and property, an absolute fortune. And when he died 130 or so years ago, he left most of that money to create a really very special school. It's a boarding school. Gives you a wonderful education. I visited his school in Auckland. It's a free boarding school. They only take pupils who come from difficult backgrounds, you know, where they've struggled. Every single aspect of the schooling is free, which is a remarkable thing in a boarding school. They don't have day pupils. It's entirely a boarding school. Everything paid for. And in Dilworth's will, he said that this school, and again, this is unusual in many ways during 130 years ago, that the school should receive pupils who are greatly in need, but from every race, from any race. And to this day, the school is very diverse. Many pupils from Maori background and indeed other Polynesian backgrounds have benefited greatly from the influence, from the legacy of James Dilworth. I also visited, I don't know if you've ever heard of Alan Brady. Maybe you've read his book. His book is called Pinot Central, a winemaker's story. Alan Brady is from Northern Ireland, and he moved to New Zealand back in 1959. He was a journalist. He worked as a journalist here, and he worked as a journalist in New Zealand. So I keep mentioning journalists, don't I? Because we've mentioned Thomas Bracken, who wrote the lyrics of the New Zealand national anthem. He was a journalist originally. I've mentioned John Ballance. He started out life as a journalist. We've got Alan Brady, who's still alive in a ripe old age, still going strong, making wine in New Zealand. And he is considered the father, really, of the Otago New Zealand today. And you go west, across the Otago Plains, you will just be driving through a wonderful world of winemaking. You might have thought you'd be driving through, you know, miles and miles and miles of sheep, but nowadays it's miles and miles and miles of vineyards. And that, in many ways, is the continuing legacy of Alan Brady from our part of the world here, who moved to in 1959. He worked television. He worked as the head of news, in fact, and the head of news broadcasting there in Dunedin. And then he decided, just for a hobby, to go out and get a little bit of land and play around with wine. learned to make wine, how he learned to cook, and learned how to do winemaking. Well, the transformation that has followed has been enormous, because Alan Brady decided to make Pinot Noir. Now, anybody who knows anything about wine will know that that is one of the most cantankerous wines of all. And all the wine experts back in the day told him, there is no way that you can do Pinot Noir in the South Island. And he went against them, because he realized that 45 degrees in the central Otago area is the same latitude as Bordeaux. So why not? And he proved them wrong. By 1990, New Zealand was exporting $1.8 million worth of wine. That has grown. This is a massive revolution today to nearly $2 billion a year. So it's been a transformation. And Alan Brady, who tells his story, and I do recommend his book, Pinot Central, who tells his own story in that book. He is a very significant figure in that remarkable transformation of the wine industry in the South Island, particularly in New Zealand. And all of these stories, these remarkable stories, have certain features in them, which I think are, I don't know, I don't want to stereotype us, but are significant personal characteristics. Alan says, for example, that he thinks his Ulsterness is part of the reason why he was able to do so well in winemaking, because he thinks he had a kind of obstinacy, you know? I'm Ulster Scots in my background. I know what he's talking about. You know, a kind of, if you're telling me I can't do this, I'm darn well going to do it. You know, that kind of, I will not be told this cannot be achieved. I'm going to do this. And he did it. And you find this in the stories of so many people in New Zealand who come from this part of the world. They brought with them an independence of mind. They brought with them a resistance to authority at times, to the kind of experts saying, you can't do that. And they said, oh yeah, we'll prove you wrong. And you get it in so many of the stories of commercial life. You get it in sporting life. Think of Dave Gallagher, who captained the All Blacks, the originals, you know, that legend of rugby football. Died in the Great War, heroic figure, Dave Gallagher, who revolutionized the game of rugby against the resistance around him of people who wanted, frankly, a more sedate game. And he'd gone in there and he pushed it. And the modern game of rugby football really has, you can see it every day, the influence of Dave Gallagher and what were then controversial approaches to rugby in his story. And again, in James Dilworth too, a desire to do something with his life, to leave a message to those who came after him, to push against the prevailing tide, and to reach out to the diversity of New Zealand, to the diversity of humanity, with a will that said any and every race merits an education. And when people cannot afford an education, those are the people I want coming to the school that I'm creating here in Auckland. Only those who are most in need. Though this is an Eton, if you like, for the most impoverished, an Eton or a Winchester for the most marginalized. It's a remarkable story. It's one that left me feeling really proud to have the connections that I do personally, politically, you might say, culturally, even religiously, with the people from here who went over there and left their mark and still leave their mark to this day in the creation of a remarkable place. I can go on forever, as you can tell, because I love New Zealand. It's very different to Australia. I love Australia too, but anybody who thinks that they're just kind of like the same place separated by an ocean needs to visit both. You recognize the differences and enjoy the differences very directly when you are there. It's a very special place, I think, for me, and I think for you as well, which is why you're connected to the Ballance story and to Ballance House. And with that, I think I've spoken now for over more than 20 minutes. I cannot impose any more of myself on you. Let's open it for questions and we can talk further.
Thank you, William. That's great, and really glad that it's so vivid to you, your travels there, that those of us who have had that privilege many times, myself and others who have children and grandchildren, I know from those who are in front of you on the screen today, being educated in New Zealand. And it's really good to hear that that warmth comes through, and indeed your own series that you did on New Zealand is still tremendous and should be seen by everybody. It should be repeated frequently on the television. So I'm going to set the ball rolling, and
keep it simple. I want simple questions, Paul. Nothing too complicated.
Well, this one is one that and we're going to turn now to, maybe some of us will be interested in your own professional role, and this is a question without reference to the BBC, or it's really a question which I think it hits a lot of us who think about what we hear and see on our television and radio, and that is the issue of popularization, of comeback and feedback. And I'd like you to give us your thoughts on Vox Pop, the dumbing down, as we see it, of television and radio programs which go out on the streets and allow the streets to come into the studio. So maybe without reference, again, I know it's being recorded and we'd recognize your own position, but talking about the popularization of the media and feedback from the public with reference to dumbing down, as sometimes has been called, and the dangers and interests in that. So maybe just, I know it's limited by time and what you can say, but do start us off with that one, please.
Goodness me. I don't use the phrase dumbing down myself. I just don't know what's involved in that phrase. I do want a kind of broadcasting world that's open to everybody. And I do want everyone to feel like their voice is heard. And I want people to feel like, particularly in my program, because that's the only thing I'm really responsible for, that people feel safe to say what they think and to know that their views, however different they are to other people's views, will be respected. I know if we look at some of the figures we've been talking about, like Ballance, or indeed like Massey, these are people who also, in their story, and it's who also engaged in popular broadcasting of their day in terms of publications, you might say. And I'm sure, I know they face criticism for trying to change the way in which you include more people in politics. You think of how Ballance, for example, reached out to Maori people and wanted a more inclusive politics as well, and no doubt faced criticism for wanting to create a bigger table at that point, but he was right to do it, absolutely right to do it. And so when I'm engaged in public service broadcasting, it's the public that we're most interested in. It's the interests of the public that we have most in mind. So whether it's texting into programs, or emailing in, or tweeting, or picking up the phone, or indeed nowadays joining TV live through this technology we're using right now, I'm for it. I was involved as a producer in a program some years ago called Sunday Morning Live on BBC One, which it must be 10 years ago now, which used this technology for the first time on national television in Britain, where instead of phoning into a show or texting in your view, you could actually join us live on the TV on BBC One network from your computer or your phone or whatever you had, using this kind of technology, whether it was Skype or something else, and make your point on TV. It was a bit kind of wrinkly at times because these were the early days. Now we take it for granted, don't we? You see it all the time in television. So I don't think that's dumbing down, to be honest, Paul. I think that's widening out. I think that's drawing in, reaching out, bringing people, particularly people whose perspectives are not always heard. So that would be my answer. I'm for that. I think we all benefit from it. Unmute.
Yes. Thank you so much. thank you for it. Diplomatic and correct in many ways. So thank you for that reflection. Now,
I should have worn a T-shirt, Paul, saying unmute. I've got a T-shirt which says unmute on the front of it. I should have worn that.
Good. Now, I'm going to throw the floor open to everybody. And if you like to go up to the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen where it says reactions, and you click on that, you can raise a hand and we call you in. So it's difficult to do, but I'm going to try it now. So
Wow.
Anybody want to come in? Please.
Paul, Mary Madden?
Yes, Mary Madden, one of our directors.
Hello.
Mary, go
Hello,
ahead.
William. Hello, William.
Hey, hello, Mary. How are you?
I'm not too bad. How are you doing? Are you keeping well?
Great. I'm doing great. I'm a bit nervous about where your question is going to take me. Any career-ending thoughts you have in mind?
You probably got there ahead of me for my career, William. William, I find your talk very interesting, and thank you so much because of your enthusiasm. Can I take you back to the start of your programs? Can I ask what I call a very sort of like basic, and forgive me, question? What was it that triggered your initial interest? What prompted you in wanting to take that series across to New Zealand? And I'll declare my own interest. I mean, I have a daughter who has now immigrated to New Zealand. She's been there.
Really?
Yeah, she'd been there 5 years, her and her husband.
Oh, lovely.
And they're living out in Auckland. And prior to that, my knowledge and understanding of New Zealand was very limited. And it's only because and I have lost my daughter to that beautiful country, and we've been over to visit, and I take your points very clearly. It is a beautiful country to visit, particularly the South Island. The scenery is absolutely stunning. Yeah. And they are very welcoming people. But what was it that triggered your initial interest to want to go to New Zealand and create that series?
Well, I mean, remember, this is thank you very much, Mary. It's good to see you again. And you should all really ask Mary some questions, by the way, about the political crisis that's happening around us. You know more about it than most people, having talked to more people than most. But I'll tell you.
I still do, William.
Exactly. The New Zealand story here in the Brave New World series is part of a larger picture about migration from this part of the world to the rest of the world. Now, when you look at migration from Ireland to other parts of the world, Ireland north and south, the largest migration areas in that story are the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. I mean, that is by far the largest catchment. Of course, we've got Irish people everywhere in the world. Of course, we've got Northern Irish people immigrating all over the world. If you go to Portugal, you'll find the O'Neills of Ulster and all the rest of it connected still in the production of wine there and port. There's a reason why there's a brandy called Hennessy. We know that the story of the Irish people around the world goes far and wide. But when you look particularly at what we now call the Northern Irish story, it is those four regions particularly. So we wanted to try and map that out, which meant doing North and South Islands in New Zealand. If you look at the migration patterns across Australia, of course, it's mostly around the coastal areas. And we follow that through. And then in the United States, that's a much better known story. Canada's pretty well known story as well in terms of Northern Irish migration or Ulster migration. I think if you were to look at Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, and look at the general audience in our viewing audience, the New Zealand story is the least well known, it's the least well understood. And so we wanted to start with that, which is why Brave New World starts in New Zealand. It starts in the Bay of Plenty, actually. And it's why it tells some of the stories I'll be telling today again. And then we link it all together. And then at the end of this kind of traipse around the world, we tell the story of some of the people coming back and making their lives here again. I mean, again, this just connects with me. My brother, Eddie, left Northern Ireland, migrated. He did the Auf Wiedersehen pet thing. That dates me, doesn't it? He went off to building site Southampton and then Germany, and then he went off to South Africa. He met his future wife, Ilma, and they've been together for nearly 40 years. They have a whole family over there, and now they have just this past year, after what, 38 years living together in South Africa, have relocated to Northern Ireland. And you get those stories as well with New Zealand and Canada and America. And it used to be a one-way story, right? It used to be a one-way street. People from here went somewhere else in the world. And now you've got people coming back, and sometimes the children of those people coming back, or their grandchildren wanting to find their roots. And when they come here, saying, wow, I'm discovering for the first time what my parents or my grandparents, or indeed my great-grandparents, called home. I look at my brother's story. We've got some of his kids have now made their home here because they've fallen in love with this place. So it's a wonderful kind of two-way experience. When we put these films up, we were just inundated with people wanting to tell us stories like that of their own travels, their own experience, and how their families' identities have been shaped by all of it. Even when I was traveling through places, like, you know, and of course we had Twitter at this point, which is really interesting because you can tweet out while you're traveling and tell people where you are, and we'd find people would contact. I'd find people contact me by Twitter and say, I see you're in Auckland, or I see you're in Dunedin, or indeed when we were in Sydney and other places, and say, I'm from Fermanagh, I'm from Tyrone. Can I meet? Let's have a coffee. And we'd meet up and have a coffee while we were in between filming and things like that. That was happening from time to time as well throughout all of this. So I had a wonderful team. Jane McGowan was my producer director, who's wonderful. She's fabulous. And we had the same team, but a wonderful team who did all of those journeys together. And it's really quite a special experience to share, actually, with a small team.
Yeah. We must meet up for a coffee sometime, will you?
Oh, Mary, I want all the gossip.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Mary. Anybody, who's next on the questions? Anybody coming in on mute, please?
Yes, Paul, I would like to ask William a question. But first, William, I'm a native of New Zealand and brought up in the 50s and 60s in that land. And I have to say, I learned a lot of history from you that I didn't learn at school in New Zealand. So that was really fantastic. And I'm particularly referring to, of course, John Ballance, but also to people like Rutherford Waddell. And one of the things that has puzzled me is when I grew up in New Zealand, I had the sense that we were a kindly, communal kind of country. We looked out for each other and cared for one another. And I tend to trace that to Waddell and to Ballance, the 19th century liberalism of John Ballance. Yeah. And I just wonder how you see that continuing on in society in New Zealand. And the contrast with Australia is, I think, quite marked for me as a result of our early history under these people. So the question I have is...
thank you.
Yeah, go on. Where you go.
I'm just looking, I'm flicking through trying to see your face, Paul. I can't find you in my gallery.
Ashley Eves, one of our directors.
Ashley, excuse me. Paul, where is Ashley on this? I'll check on. Where is it?
Swipe, I think.
Keep swiping until I find you. All right. It's a very good question. It's a very interesting question. Rutherford Waddell, the Presbyterian minister, County Down born. We tell his story in our series, obviously, as well. And he brings with them that, you describe it as liberalizing. It is a kind of 19th century liberal political and religious vision, just as you see in Ballance. That famous sermon on the sin of cheapness, I think we tell that the story of the sermon in the film. I think that is one of the most remarkable, one of the most interesting of thought, really, that I've encountered in social justice preaching, because here you have a man who, I mean, everyone in a kind of in a kind of liberal economic free market world that's developing might be saying, isn't this wonderful? Look at how cheap these goods are. This is fabulous. This is the world we live in today as well, isn't it? And you think, this is amazing. I can get this so cheaply. And he's saying, look behind the label, look behind the price tag. Where did that shirt come from? Where did those shoes come from? Who made this? What are the conditions they live in as they're making it? How much were they paid? Were they paid at all? Is this slave labor? And in his case, that was one of the movements. He changed the sweatshops culture in New Zealand with a sermon that was published and became remarkably significant politically, culturally, in changing people's attitude to the injustices of society. And I guess it's a sermon that still has a resonance today, doesn't it? Because we have the option of buying, particularly online, so many very cheap goods. Where are they coming from? I mean, it's a difficult question, isn't it? It's a haunting question, because it's so much easier to take the cheap deal, isn't it? It's so much easier to take the deal rather than to ask, who's suffering for me to benefit from this? So yes, I think in the 19th century and in Ireland as well, you had that free thinking, dissenting liberal tradition. You had it in in church life as well, and some of that was exported from here. You have from the 1798 period into the 1800s, you have a radical edge to Presbyterianism, and you have a political radicalism that goes to the United States. You have a social justice perspective as well that goes with that. It's very easy to stereotype those figures and that movement. They're not easily stereotyped. You shouldn't stereotype them. You do get some people who are on the right and the left when it comes to some political policy questions. But often you have people who are pushing against the assumptions of the society around them, because the world that they came from had assumptions that represented inequality or injustice in their own lives. So yeah, I think it's a great question. I wish more people knew about Rutherford Woodell, actually.
What I was thinking about, William, was, do you see a lingering on of that 19th century liberalism attitude to social justice in New Zealand as compared to the other countries you visited?
Oh, you know, I think you would need to live somewhere longer to really properly answer that question. What I will say is, you know, racism is alive and well in New Zealand and in Australia and America and Canada and here, and it takes different forms. Discrimination is alive and well too. New Zealand has, you know, has a long and rich history of workers' rights, social justice. I mean, the first country in the world, wasn't it, to give people full pensions and to do some basic health things way before other countries did it. But you know, you've got also a changing global world where the migration of people across Asia and into Australasia and into New Zealand can throw up very, very sharp examples, I think, of racism as people try to make sense of the world they're in. I certainly saw that. I spoke with Maori people. I spoke with First Nations people in Canada too, and in Australia, and they tell their stories too. But I also continually met in New Zealand people who wanted to honestly recognize the colonial history of New Zealand. And it's a colonial story. The Treaty of Waitangi is a colonial treaty. It predates by a year the creation of the colony of New Zealand. And it's a controversial document because there are concerns about the different translations that existed and whether it was fully honored in the spirit and in the letter. And New Zealand and its politicians over the years have done a great deal, I think, to address some of that. And I've been in churches in New Zealand where before a service of worship even begins, the pastor will acknowledge the land that the church is is on, and where that land is from, and who that land is from, and whose land that is. Not just the land of New Zealand, but the land of the traditional people of New Zealand and the ancient people of New Zealand. So, yeah, that's as best an answer as I think I can probably risk, because I'd need to know a lot more to have a go at it.
I think that's very fair. And indeed, if you look at what Bracken tried to do, he was very much aware. He was very aware of his own sense of the breaches of the treaty as he went through life. But it's also, I think, those of us who've been there sense that the willingness to face the issues in New Zealand contrasts starkly with other places, perhaps Australia. The Indigenous people are regarded in a more open way, and I think in New Zealand, that's my sense as a visitor. Anyway, William, I have a question here from one of our guests who asked me, are the programs still available on the iPlayer?
Oh, goodness. I don't think they're currently on the iPlayer, because the iPlayer doesn't try to be a receptory of every program we broadcast. It's left on the iPlayer for a certain amount of time, and then it's brought back out again, and programs will be broadcast again, and then it'll be on the iPlayer again. So I think that's the answer. Okay. It's not there at the moment.
Thank you. That's from John. Karina, bring you in now if you unmute yourself.
Hey, Karina.
Hi, kia ora, William. Saringa girl here, living in Northern Ireland. Sorry, I've had my camera off, been multitasking with work today. But just want to more information rather than a question. But if you are interested in more of the Maori input and the Irish input into the Maori colonialism dating back to the New Zealand Land Wars, I don't know if you've come across a guy called Vincent O'Malley. He's originally, his family come from Ireland. He's a historian in New Zealand who actually specialises in the New Zealand Land Wars. So if you're interested in digging into that, or anyone else is interested in digging into that, Vincent O'Malley's the guy to follow. Yeah, so he does a lot of talks, a lot of YouTube clips, a lot of articles.
Where is Vincent based?
Vincent is in New Zealand. I actually think he's based in Wellington. He's actually married to Fiona Kidman, who is also another historian, and Fiona Kidman's mother, sorry, Joanne Kidman, and she's the daughter of Fiona Kidman, who wrote This Mortal Boy, who's of course about your man from Northern Ireland. So New Zealand's a small place, and the links between here and Northern Ireland continue.
Oh, that's very good. I bet there's a podcast in there somewhere with Vincent O'Malley in it, is there? He sounds like the kind of guy who would have a great podcast.
Yeah, he actually, when you have a look at him, he actually looks very similar to Ashley Eaves, but anyway.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting. Yes.
No worries.
Yeah, the New Zealand.
Thanks, Karina. Nice to see you. Who's next? Anybody coming in now? Any next question from anybody who wishes to put their question? Could I call on Brian? Brian, who, if you unmute yourself, Brian William was, you've heard from Shannon, has designed our new exhibition superbly, and you've heard from the mayor. He's very much been involved in curatorial work in Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council. Brian, do you like to unmute and come in with a question? You need to unmute. You need to unmute. Brian, you're still muted.
Yes, I think that's me now, is it?
Yep.
Oh, good. Yes, well, I've really been enjoying the program, and William, if I may, I was very interested in what you said about Ulster obstinacy and the influence Alan Brady's view of that. It's just quite an interesting thought in terms of people of Ulster descent in New Zealand, and where having come from this part of the world, we're very familiar with that obstinacy.
But Brian, you know what? It would be good to be more like John Ballance in that you might get your obstinacy from your dad, but get your caring liberal values from your mother. Put them together and be obstinate about the right things.
Yeah, well, Ballance. I've just reread Tim McIver's book, and I see you've been given it as a gift, and I do recommend. It's a very well written book. Actually, I had a copy of it years ago and didn't properly read it, but having reread it for the purpose of the working for the trust and in terms of the new exhibition in Balance, I warmly do recommend it. And actually, you really come to appreciate Balance more in terms of being quite a remarkable person. And coming from, I mean, his father was quite a conservative figure, a Church of Ireland evangelical, and yet he seems to have got from his mother's non-conformist Quaker background a sense of liberal, that justice. He'd been horrified with seeing the sectarian riots in Belfast, is quite interesting. And then going to Birmingham, where he had all these great liberal influences of, John Bright, who influenced Abraham Lincoln, anti-slavery, all of those things he's taken on board, and he's becomes quite a remarkable figure in his political philosophy and thinking, and that really incredible reforming liberal government that stayed in office for so long, achieved so much. Votes for women, 20 years before votes for women were achieved in the United Kingdom, first old age pension, all that labour legislation, all of that, so much was built on the foundation that Ballance gave that group of politicians that he brought together. So I think it's right to have great admiration for him, and he deserves to be better known about both here and in New Zealand. And I suppose that's
right. He's not as well known as in New Zealand as you might have hoped. Actually, I mean, we did some filming. Obviously, Tim McIver was really my guide to Balance in this series. Actually, I first met Tim when he worked at the United Nations, as a diplomat for the New Zealand government in the United Nations, and then he moved back to Wellington. So we did some filming with him in the Premier House in Wellington, and we also did some filming at the National Library. Actually, that's where I saw the actual Treaty of Waikato, not Waikato, that's the Bishop of Waikato, the actual treaty we're talking about today of, somebody remind me, Waitangi. But there's a statue of Balance beside the Parliament and the Beehive building out there. And I just asked a whole bunch of people going past, who is that? And they didn't know. He is not as well known. He wasn't in office, of course, for very long, and he died in office. Certainly not as well. I mean, we have prime ministers in the United Kingdom. We have Taoiseach even in Ireland, in the short history of Ireland, who are not as well known. And there are many people in Northern Ireland who could not name you all the 6 prime ministers of Northern Ireland. That's not a lot of people. So it's just one of those things. But I think you're right. It's a wonderful story. Tim's book is excellent, actually.
So can I ask you if your programs have ever been played in New Zealand? Was there ever any talk about that?
I don't. I don't know. These aren't my programs, incidentally. Of course, I'm just a BBC presenter. They belong to the BBC.
Yes.
So the BBC has a big platform across the world, and it wouldn't be the first. I can't answer that question because I don't know. I probably made about 40 TV series with the BBC, but I don't know what they've done in various places with them. But I don't know.
One final point just to mention was, you mentioned the winemaking. There was also a very significant Ulster winemaker from Pomeroy called Ernie Hunter. He won the Sunday Times wine competition in the 1980s and was really a pioneer developer of a white wine in Ashfield.
Marlborough?
Yes, in Marlborough. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So, and Sam Neill, the actor, his father.
Yes, of course. That's right. Unfortunately, we weren't able. We had actually planned to do some filming with Sam Neill, but it didn't work out in terms of scheduling.
Yeah. He is a wine. He has a vineyard too, and calls his wine apparently Fusilier after his father, who was a member of the Royal Irish Fusiliers.
Yeah.
He's also done the sound, the voiceover for the recent series on New Zealand Geographical, which I'm not sure which channel is doing it. It's been on.
Is that right?
Sorry?
It was on BBC 4, I think.
BBC 4. Sam Neill does the narration on that.
I still regret hearing all these wine stories. Having you know, I did dry January, and I'm continuing. Trying to lose 3 stone by the summer. Otherwise, I'd be right up there ordering some Hunter's wines to try it out.
You need to talk to your colleague who comes on at 9 o'clock in the mornings about that.
Oh, I never talked about that sort of thing. Nobody wants to hear about my weight.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Any other questions? Any other questions, folks? Can I, Freddie Hall, who's our executive chairman.
Hello, William. I'm very conscious of the time, but a very simple one. Just you have the great privilege of working across all sectors of society, doing programs and subjects, talking to people. We all get our job satisfaction in different ways. Would you care to say which sector is your preferred one to work with and why?
Which sector in what sense?
Which sector of society or profession or whatever, whether it's church, state, sport, religion.
Oh my goodness. Ooh,
and
which
one gives you the most satisfaction and why? And I'll not ask you the supplementary, the ones that don't.
Goodness. I mean, I've only worked in 3 different areas. I mean, I'm on my 3rd job here in life. That's the way it is these days, isn't it? But I've been working as a journalist now for 20 years, working with the BBC. I've only ever worked for the BBC as a journalist. I started presenting Sunday Sequence back in 2002, and then I became full-time with the BBC in 2004. And day one of my full-time work with the BBC, they put me on a plane and sent me to Churchill, Manitoba, to make a TV documentary about climate change. And and Churchill, Manitoba, of course, is on the same latitude as Belfast. So what would happen if the North Atlantic conveyor, the jet stream, switched off? We would be plunged into temperatures comparable to Churchill, Manitoba. So off we went and did that. And there began my work full-time with the BBC. Before that, I had a mix of working in the church, in that I was a Presbyterian minister for a while. I trained in America for 3 years. And I worked in a church in New York and then also in Belfast, and then became a university chaplain. I also taught philosophy and theology. So I have an academic background. So I've had 3 different academic and church and media type thing. You're asking me, they're all very different, but they're all quite similar. The thing they all have in common is communication, isn't it? I mean, that's me. I enjoy communication. I enjoy even trying to make sense of what makes for good communication. I'm very critical of myself, but I enjoy learning. When I see a great communicator, that really, turns me on really to kind of and discover great communicators and try to ape their skills or learn their skills. So I think that's the one thing, that's the thread linking all of my careers so far. All the things I've done is curiosity and communication, finding out more about the world. And the BBC and the journalism they've enabled me to do has been really a remarkable privilege, because they've taken me around the world a few times to do that and put me in the middle of interesting experiences. Things happen, and if you're in the right place at the right time, or the BBC sent you there, you can be a journalist sent into the midst of things happening. So I've also been able to bring them all together in different kinds of programs, you know, like I present Sunday on Radio 4, and so I might find myself in the Vatican commentating on a major event from St. Peter's Square Live, which involves really quite some academic dimensions to that kind of work, but also the church and religion, communication and journalism. I like it when it all comes together, when I'm lucky enough to have all my interests and passions in one moment, followed by pasta and a decent red wine.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Freddie. We're coming to the end of our time, but what protocol often means that some of our special guests don't get a chance to ask questions. So, Mr. Mayor and Deputy High Commissioner, is there anything you'd like to ask William before we wind up the session?
You worried me there, Paul, when you mentioned the word protocol. I thought, what? What do you want? What are you asking here?
I often feel sorry for the special guests, but Mr. Mayor, Stephen, is there anything you'd like to say before we wind up?
Mr. Chairman, I just have to say Dr. Crawley's answer to Freddie's question around the sectors which he deals with. I thought we were going to the realms of politicians and elected representatives and things like that there. So I thought, William, you handled that very well in your day job. So congratulations.
He said I was wonderfully avoiding the question. I'll take that.
And Shannon, Deputy High Commissioner, is there anything you'd like to say before we take leave?
Thanks, Paul, and thanks very much, William. That was incredibly interesting. I've been Googling you madly while we've been listening in and learning all about the series that you did. Nothing further to say other than a huge thank you, and I'm sure next time myself or the High Commissioner are in Belfast, we'd love to come and say hello in person.
That would be wonderful, Shannon. And I'd
might
love
even
to
bring you some Pinot Noir if you're lucky.
Yeah, I should visit Ballance House as well. I'm embarrassed to say I've never actually been to Ballance House. You must. Yeah. That would be great.
Good. Well, we will give you a very warm welcome, as you know. Anytime you happen to be free, it's getting you free is probably the difficulty, William. But I would just like to say on behalf of everybody, we've been greatly entertained and educated by you this afternoon. We are again so appreciative that you've done this on top of just coming off air and all that you've had this week. We're very most grateful to you, and we'd love to see you again. As we come to open up our new exhibition to visits officially in the springtime, COVID permitting, maybe if we can get a chance to say something to your own audience about the wonderful opportunity to see the fantastic exhibition here, which has been just recently given. You've mentioned the church background, and George McMurray, who was brought out by Dilworth to actually run education in Auckland and particularly found the school. George McMurray was virtually an unknown cleric in the Dungannon area. And we have, by the way, the Vice Principal and his wife of RSD on with us this afternoon. George McMurray was a formidable character, and it was through that they brought out the High Irish Cross that stands, as you saw, William, in the school grounds, and then came back to its foundations just down the road from Dungannon, and they have presented us with the most beautiful bronze replica which stands in the exhibition. And all that connection, so valuable, and it's our job as a trust to keep those roots really cherished and revitalized from generation to generation, so that people understand the tremendously important links between our two countries. So the invitation's open to you, and we will indeed keep the channels open to you, hopefully, William.
I look forward to it, Paul. Absolutely, I look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our special guests. Thank you to everybody, members, volunteers, visitors from all around the country. We wish you a very happy Deputy High Commissioner. Sunday is the official day. We hope it goes well. I'm sure you'll be involved in many things in London, if not around the country. It's an important day for us all, and we look forward to hearing what goes on in London there. But for one and all, thank you to Rory and to Sally for their technical expertise behind the scenes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Professor Stockman, for being with us too today. And to all of us, we wish you a very happy Waitangi Day and see you all soon. Thank you and goodbye for now. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Paul. Lovely to see you all.
Bye.
Kia katou.
Bye, everybody.